Thanks everybody for being here today. Hope everybody had a wonderful Memorial Day weekend and had an opportunity to honor those folks who haven't been able to make it back home. Today we're here to talk about energy again. You've heard our caucus talk about it a number of times since the beginning of the session all the way through till now, and you'll continue to hear us talk about this issue, and particularly in regards to rising rates. The good news is that there is in fact an opportunity to do something about that, and that is a pending initiative in the Energy Committee. We are joined today by the two Republican leads on the committee, the House and Senate, and you'll hear from them in a minute. I think what's really important and what we want to underscore today is that there is still time to change course. There is still time to do something about this impending rate increase that's coming as a result of bad policy that the Democrats have passed since they reclaimed their majorities. The time is ripe right now to take advantage of that and to stop the impact on ratepayers that will be felt later this summer. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Senator Harrington and then Representative Foster to talk about what's happening down in the Energy Committee.
Good afternoon, Senator Matt Harrington, Republican lead on the Energy, Utilities and Technology Committee. As Senator Stewart said, since January we've been coming to you saying we have to do something by the end of this session. The end of the session is now only a couple of weeks away. We have kind of one final at-bat, so to speak, to use a baseball analogy, to get something done. So with Representative Foster, who's behind me, using a bill that he put in earlier in the session and working with the Office of the Public Advocate, we're going to use that bill as a vehicle to try to get something done this session. I'm not going to get into the details of that bill because Representative Foster is behind me, but certainly we have a looming crisis ahead of us. The OPA estimates that the stranded costs for net energy billing is $220 million a year. We hope with this legislation we could cut that roughly in half. But with that, I will hand it over to Representative Foster so you can go over the details of the bill.
Thank you, Senator Harrington. I am Representative Steve Foster from Dexter. This session, Senator Stewart and I put in LD 1347, a bill which would have eliminated net energy billing. Obviously, that would be quite a change, and there was a lot of opposition to that. I worked with the Public Advocate's Office with some language that I had put together earlier on trying to pare down some of the expected costs to our ratepayers in Maine that net energy billing was projected to bring. And as a result, sharing that with the Public Advocate's Office, they took that language, they looked at this bill, and we now are putting forward a sponsor's amendment to LD 1347, and it will be called an act to reduce the effect of net energy billing on Maine ratepayers. And basically, I'll go through some of what that means. First of all, it would not eliminate net energy billing. It would put in some changes that we think would save ratepayers some of the projected costs that we expect to see by the end of the year. It would take effect September 1st of 2023, if passed. It would limit project size to 660 kilowatts, which is basically what was in place before LD 1711, which really spread the net energy billing opportunities for projects back in the 129th legislature. It would also limit 10 customers, if you will, per project. It would require that 50% of the electricity used be used behind the meter. In other words, for instance, current policy, if you get credits, it would require that those 50% of those credits be used by those individuals who are in the project or have rooftop solar, if you will. One unique piece of this that we think would be very beneficial is it would allow the PUC to review the actual rates being paid for net energy billing, which, as you probably know, currently are about 20 cents a kilowatt hour compared to what is 4 to 5 cents for grid scale solar. So they would look at this and make sure that, first of all, the projects were able to realize a profit from their production, but as well the ratepayers would see more protection because, as you know, currently net energy billing is tied to the standard offer, and when that went up in January, that's what really drove some of these increased expected rate costs to our ratepayers. The PUC would also offer a competitive solicitation to existing projects that are out there. Some of these are very large. That's similar to what they do with the grid scale or industrial scale projects that we now have coming in at very low rates. In that, if a project wanted to go away from net energy billing, they could put in a bid and the PUC would review it. Now that does two things. It would most likely offer them a profit because they wouldn't ask for a certain rate unless it did. And it would also guarantee them a contract, such as grid scale has. Currently, net energy billing, as we know, is in statute, and it can be changed by any successor legislature. And so this would offer up an opportunity, if these projects were concerned, to bid into that type of a program and guarantee them their rates for the coming years. There were a few things in this bill that I had hoped I would get in reductions in that didn't occur. One of those is, with net energy billing, the project does not have to pay transmission delivery rates for electricity that they are selling, if you will, out onto the grid. And so they get to use, once they are connected, whether it's rooftop solar for an individual homeowner or a community solar project, they make use of the wires and poles, and that's part of the net energy billing. LD 1711 bill was that they would not be required to pay T&D charges for that. That will still be the same. The other one is that they receive their credits, whether it's, again, rooftop solar or a community solar project, they receive their credits at the retail rate. No matter when that credit goes out onto the system to be used by others, the credit they get is at the retail rate versus wholesale for other energy producers. So that's kind of the high points, if you will, of what this bill will try to do. We're hoping that we can garner enough support from representatives from the other side of the aisle that have been hearing from their constituents. This is not a Democrat or Republican issue when it comes to paying our light bills. And I know that all legislators have been hearing more and more about the cost of electricity. Now, a lot has been said about it's due to natural gas prices, and some of that certainly is true. But what we are looking at is a potentially extreme increase of $220 million a year, and I personally accept the numbers from the Public Advocate's Office. They've worked very hard to look at this and come up with that number, but we are trying to avoid that additional cost to ratepayers on top of what they're already paying. As the price of natural gas goes up and down, I expect so will standard offer in reaction to it, but net energy billing, those costs will stay. And that looks like for the 20-year period. So this offers an opportunity not only for ratepayers hopefully to get out from some of this burden, but also for net energy billing projects, administrators to find a way to continue to profit while providing carbon-free energy, and however, while also recognizing that our ratepayers are suffering. we could end up with the highest per kilowatt hour rate in the nation here in the state of Maine, something I never would have believed just a few short years ago. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take questions. Let's start with this subject first, and then we can open it up after that to any other topics you folks want to cover today. So, thanks, Steve.
Representative Foster, you said that you have been working with or talking with the Office of Public Advocate about this. Have they endorsed your amendment, or are they on board with this?
Yes, the Office of the Public Advocate, I will say that because so much was changed, this is basically a bill that they've put together. We've gone over it. I support it myself, and I'm glad to be able to offer it to the Energy Utilities Technology Committee, which I believe that will happen tomorrow afternoon.
Have you had any conversations?
And I'll say too, just to fill you in on the Senate side, we've actually had the public advocate in to our caucus to brief everybody on what's going on. Unanimous support for it within our caucus.
Have you had a chance to talk to any of your other committee colleagues about, other than Senator Harrington, about this? Any Democrats open to this idea on the committee?
Well, I haven't gotten down to the point where I've determined if anyone will support it or not, but I have talked with some who recognize that I think comments have been made to me that they didn't realize how much net energy billing was going to cost. And of course, there was a flood that of solar projects that came in once that bill was passed. And as you may recall, and when getting back to the PUC, looking at what is practical, what can ratepayers afford, what still keeps companies in business that are doing this. When the first group of bids came in for net energy billing solar under LD 1711, they rejected those. My recollection is they were around 13 cents plus per kilowatt hour back in, I believe it's 2021. They did receive bids for the grid scale solar and accepted those. I think they looked at that and said these bids are too high. And later on, I think they've received bids that may be higher than those that have been accepted. So I'm hoping that the Democrats are in a position now where they recognize that this costs a lot more than anyone had really expected.
I think it's important to note too that the so-called stated goals of what net energy billing sought to originally do, which was to spur on solar development in Maine, that's obviously been met. It's as evident as you take a drive up the road here and you'll see solar panels being installed everywhere across the state. So I think they can check that box, but that doesn't mean that we have to continue like lemmings jumping off the cliff here. They can have their cake and eat it too. I think this is a very reasonable approach. It represents pure compromise between Republicans and Democrats. This is not the bill that Representative Foster and I originally put forward, which was to do away with the program entirely. We have compromised substantially here to get to this point and put forward, with the help of the public advocate in his office, a true proposal in a bipartisan spirit here to try to get meaningful rate relief for ratepayers in Maine. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, how do we know that community solar is reducing Maine's greenhouse gas emissions?
Anybody on the committee want to take a stab?
It's a good question. So certainly the production that we see, kilowatt hours, if you will, is carbon-free energy that we receive from those projects. Now, one can argue the carbon footprint from beginning of building a solar panel until completion out in the field. If you did a cost analysis or a carbon footprint analysis of that process, some might not agree that it's entirely beneficial. But the problem is there's a lot, at 15% power factor, or basically 15% efficiency of a solar panel, there's a lot required to make those successful in supplying the the electricity that's needed on our grid. And we're looking at more costs, for example, for battery storage. We're considering bills for that would subsidize the installation of battery storage facilities, some of which are already being done commercially, and other things that will continue to add costs to the kilowatt hour for a ratepayer in Maine.
Time for one more.
Any thoughts on likelihood of wrapping up the next couple of weeks?
When I spoke to Troy last week, he was adamant that the 21st would be adhered to as our statutory adjournment date. We certainly would support a joint order adjourning the legislature on the 21st, as we are supposed to per statute. So all signs point to that right now. I think we're going to see, as committees wrap up here, a lot of carryovers and a lot of bills that we'll have to pick back up here in January again, and maybe even work to some extent in the interim. But I think we can hopefully get out of here on the 21st. That appears to be his plan. I'm not saying that's shared by everybody in the building. Okay, thanks everybody. Have a great week.
There you go.